Welcome back to the channel. I'm your host for today, Claire Headley, and I am joined by none other than Apostate Alex. Thank you so much for joining me again, Alex. Good to
Thank
see
you for
you.
having me back, Claire. How are you doing?
Yes, I'm good. How are you doing?
Yeah, good, thank you. Hanging on in there.
Yes, you have been a busy bee. I love what you're doing over there in the UK. I don't know if you want to touch on that first before we dive into our discussion for today, which is going to be about Greenfields, which is the Scientology school in England that I attended from age 10 to 13, and the various nefarious things surrounding that, and also many of the very well-known families surrounding Greenfields. But do you want to touch on some updates first?
Yeah, I mean, I've been non-stop. I mean, Scientology weren't wrong when they declared me a potential trouble source, because trouble source I have become. I've been pretty much non-stop since we last spoke, kind of being an activist, I suppose. I met with a member of parliament last week down in Poole, where Scientology have got a very large mission that it's been around for years. And I met with a member of parliament and I said, hey, look, these are the concerns, and I'm trying to work with Diane Abbott, who's now the mother of the House, in the House of Commons, trying to get this table a debate on Scientology. And, you know, it's not about their religious beliefs, it's about their behavior and the way they're treating people. Would you support a debate? And he said, absolutely. He's going to work closely with Diane Abbott, and he's also going to see what he can do on the local level to, for example, stop the Dianetics book selling booth that they have at the local town market every week. So
Wow.
lots of little things like that I've been working on. Narconon, the drug rehabilitation center that they've got here in Sussex. After this big expose in The Guardian, there was a big investigation by the Care Quality Commission, which regulates care homes and drug rehab centres and that sort of thing, and also the Charities Commission. And I can't say what the outcome was, but I can say that those investigations have now concluded. It's been removed from the CQC website. And so, yeah, just kind of lots of stuff like that behind the scenes. And there's another couple of things I'm working on that will come out soon, I'm sure.
Yes, no, amazing. Thank you for your persistence. I know it can be exhausting at times, but it's just what you're doing is fantastic. And yeah, much more to come on many fronts, I'm sure. We have some similar efforts over here. And the more we can educate the public in general and people in positions of power who have the authority to take initiative, the better.
I think that's the key thing. Educating people is so important. And one of the kind of things that's driving me is in the UK specifically, Scientology is seen by the wider general public as this crazy American cult that believe in space aliens. And yes, to some extent that you know, to some degree that's true. To a large extent, people don't realize that, yes, it's true, but it's also an abusive organization that's harming people. And that's what I'm trying to do, is change that public perception by educating people and saying, hey, it's not about their wacky beliefs. It's about, you know, the RPF. It's about the forced abortions. It's about, you know, human trafficking and all this other stuff that's going on that we need to you know, put a stop to. It's not about whether they believe in aliens, regardless of whether that's true or not. For most Scientologists, they don't even know the Xenu story. It's about, you
Exactly.
can't treat people the way you do. And so what I'm trying to really do is educate people and try and get people to realize the truth about this organization, rather than just kind of disregarding it. Oh, it doesn't really matter. There's not many of them. They're just weird people. You know, it's a dangerous movement.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that many of the recent documentaries have helped to change that narrative. For example, Going Clear, the HBO documentary, and then, of course, Leah Remini's Scientology in the Aftermath. Prior to that, at least here in Colorado, if we talked with someone and they were like, oh, like, for example, during our lawsuit, I had to, you know, deal with a number of people here locally that the topic was came up about Scientology, and they were like, "Oh, you were in Scientology?" And I'm like, "No, well, not anymore. No, I escaped." And they were like, "Oh, that's that crazy thing of that Tom Cruise does, of him jumping up and down on the couch, you know." That was like 2012. Now the public awareness of the abuses is much more the focus. Nonetheless, I still think that education, even on the efforts that we've been making is to educate law enforcement on the mindset and provide resources so that when something goes sideways, which it often does with members of the C organization, and law enforcement gets involved, then they know they have a better idea and they have resources that they can reach out to the Aftermath Foundation, for example, and get help with dealing with that situation, because law enforcement is limited by what they can do.
Absolutely, and educating people on how they can help. It's a lot of people don't realize that when you're in the C organization, your access to the outside world is controlled. You're limited in terms of your internet access, and it's all monitored. So it's really hard to make these people aware of the resources that are available, if they don't have access to the outside world. So a lot of things that I've been doing in East Grinstead specifically is working with law enforcement and local residents and saying, hey, if you ever come across someone that looks like they're trying to leave, or, the signs of modern slavery or human trafficking, these are the things to look out for. And these are the numbers to call. These are the resources to make sure they're aware that are available. And that education thing is really important. And it's going to be a harder task to try and get that message through to the people at St. Hill and currently in the Sea Org, but doing what I can. And that's what the IS protest is all about as well.
Yes.
Making sure that every person that walks onto that property is aware that there's a community of people here to support them. That's the most important thing for me. Beyond anything else, is just making sure they know we're not this big scary SPs. Your life isn't going to be terrible and you're going to end up working in McDonald's, which also there's nothing wrong with working in McDonald's, but that's what they tell you is going to happen.
Right.
You can be successful in life outside of Scientology. And so if you are scared to make the jump, just be aware that you're not alone. And the more people that speak out, the more likely it is people realize that. And I think that's really important. And all of the people that have shared their story in Leah Remini's show and on your channel, and all these people that are speaking out for decades, it's all building this foundation of stuff that's out there that helps people realize that they're not alone.
Yep, 100% for sure. I know, speaking of McDonald's, I was the day I escaped, I was like, I would gladly flip burgers for the rest of my life compared to this hell that I'm running away from. And
and you get paid for it.
right.
Like an actual wage.
Yeah, exactly. And in fact, my very first job 3 days after I escaped was as a waitress at a pizza restaurant. And I did not even ask how much they were going to pay me. I was just so happy to be free and to have a job and to be starting my life over. It's just like, it's never been about money for me. It's just about living life and getting on with it.
Yeah, and having the freedom of choice, waking up and deciding, okay, I don't like this job anymore. I'm going to go get another one and do something
Right.
different. You can't do that in the Sea Org. If
No,
they tell you to go and move country or move to a different base, you have to do it, even if that
yeah.
means separating from your family or loved ones. And that's the thing about the real world, is if you don't want to do something, you don't have to.
Totally. I know. To any person currently in the Sea Org, I would ask, are you happy? Are you accomplishing what you thought you would set out to accomplish when you signed that billion-year contract? And if not, it's never too late to start over. Never. There is an amazing world out here and amazing resources and a whole ton of people who would gladly help in a heartbeat. So, to my family members still in the C organization, that applies to you too.
Yeah, and I've always said, even the people who treated me the most horrible, and the people who've been particularly nasty, or the people I didn't get along with in Scientology, even those people, if I get a phone call at 2 o'clock in the morning from any one of those, I will drop everything and go and pick them up. Whatever, it doesn't matter, because Scientology makes you a different person. And it's not about, oh, I want to pick and choose who I want to help. It's, anyone can be a victim of a cult, and anyone can fall into Scientology's trap. Whether you're raised in it or whether you joined, it's going to be abusive and harmful to anybody that's involved. And so my extension to help, goes out to anybody, even if I didn't know you, or even if we didn't get along, or even if you were the person that locked me in a room, that's so it doesn't matter. This is, it's about helping people.
Yep, completely. Absolutely. Awesome. Well, yes. So to launch into our topic for today, we will talk about greenfields and I suppose our mutual knowledge and experiences with the people surrounding that. As I mentioned at the outset, greenfields is the UK equivalent of Delphi in the US. So it's a Scientology-based school located in Forest Row. Is that right?
Yep.
Yeah. I mean, obviously I went there, but it's been a minute, and I don't actually know if it's considered adjacent to Forest Row or in Forest Row, but
It's in Forest Row.
yeah.
It's a private school as well, so I guess maybe we need to do a bit of education on the UK school system because it is slightly different to the US, I gather, in that I know you have private and public schools in the US as well, but in the UK, I think it's changed now, but you used to finish school when you were 16 and you have to follow a curriculum even if you're homeschooled, but the independent schools are different in terms of the way they're inspected to the state-funded schools. And when you turn 16, you can then choose to do an optional 2 years of A levels, which is kind of what we call college. And then when you turn 18, you then go to university. I think it's changed now and you have to stay in school till 18. But when I was in school, I almost went to Greenfields as well. I didn't end up going, but I'd finished my GCSEs at 16 and they were like, oh, well, if you want to do your A levels and, you know, you can't be on staff because you've got to do your A levels, because that's what your family want to do. How about you do them at Greenfields? Because then at least you're using Scientology study tech. And I was like, yeah, that's great. I was really up for it. And it was too expensive. And luckily I never went and went to a normal school instead. But yeah, it's a private school. It's a very expensive private school. And it's inspected by the Independent Schools Inspectorate rather than Ofsted, which is the government.
I see. Okay. Yeah, that's good context. And yes, in my case, I was in the Cadet organization from age 4 to 10. And ironically, most of the Sea organization children did not attend Greenfields because of the cost. So even though their parents, my mom and other parents had committed to 1 billion years of service and were making, the UK equivalent of however many 20 pounds a week, I think, if they were lucky, they couldn't afford to send the cadet children to the Scientology school. So we went to public school. But then when I finished primary school, which was the public school of West Hoathly, my mom essentially had convinced me of the danger of public schools. And so I was absolutely terrified at the thought of going to a public school. And so my mother told me, you should ask your grandmother, who was not a Scientologist, to pay for you to go to Greenfields. I had to pay. I had to be the one to broach it with my grandmother, not my mother, because Scientology was always a bone of contention with my grandmother. And then on top of that, they gave me a scholarship. So, because I was doing really well in public school, and so they gave me a scholarship. And of course, promptly on arrival at Greenfields, everything. I mean, it's not. My experience there was absolutely awful. A lot of the teachers, at least at the time that I was there, which was I want to say it was 86 when I started there, early 86, and I was there until mid 88. And then September 88, my family moved to the US. After which they never put me back in school, by the way. That's a story for another.
In America?
No, but I wasn't legally, I wasn't born in the US. It's kind of at least at the time, it was a funky loophole. Anyhow, so yeah, I met, but what I was saying is many of the teachers were ex-members of the Sea organization and/or ex-members of the Guardian's office. So for example, Margaret Hodkin, to my knowledge, was involved in the Guardian's office before she founded Greenfields, and she's now since passed away, as my understanding. But her son, one of her sons, Peter Hodkin, I think is the UK equivalent of Ken Moxon in the US, right?
Yes, he is the lawyer that represents Scientology here in the UK, and I've had a number of dealings with him recently. Interesting fact about Peter Hodkin, because he's the one that got Scientology buildings declared places of worship and therefore able to conduct religious wedding ceremonies back in 2013. And because of his hard work on that front and trying to get religious recognition, charity status, all that stuff, even though he's not been successful in that regard, I found out recently he gets his entire bridge for free as a gift of David Miscavige. As long as he keeps moving on the bridge, he can't stop. He has to keep progressing. He's been given lots of lavish gifts like Rolex watches and so on from Miscavige, and he does whatever, COB tells him to do. And that includes writing very scary letters to journalists, for example, that are trying to cover Scientology in the UK and threatening lawsuits. And recently writing to the council in the Mid Sussex District Council to request a public spaces protection order to outlaw protesting outside St Hill for 3 years, which is the current battle I'm undergoing at the moment to try and stop that happening. But yeah, he is a big, doesn't directly work for OSA, he's an independent lawyer, but he does whatever OSA tells him to do, and he defends Scientology in the courts of law.
Yeah, and he is, I believe, a second generation Scientologist. Yeah. So, oh my goodness. And so, yeah, I mean, Mark McQuaid was one of the teachers at Greenfields, as was Veronica Tupham. And let's see who else. Joe Stevens. All of those people were ex-members of the Sea Organization. And so it was a very tight-knit, closed circle. Though there were children even back then who attended Greenfields, even though they had no involvement in Scientology.
Exactly.
Yeah. And to me, that's part of the danger of the entire Greenfields approach is it's not that they disclose at the outset that these children are going to be indoctrinated in Scientology and are going to be treated as if they're Scientologists.
Yeah. It's dangerous, and this is one of the things that I've been trying to do locally in East Grinstead is raise awareness, because they've been on this massive recruitment campaign at the moment to try and get new students to sign up on Facebook groups and all of that in the East Grinstead area. And I've just been commenting on every single post, just saying, hey, did you guys realize that the latest Independent Schools Inspectorate report flagged serious safeguarding concerns about the kids that go to this school? Please read the report before considering going to an open day or sending your kids to this school. They rely on international students particularly because Scientology is dying. It's a shrinking group of people. Yes, there's lots of money involved, but there's only a certain number of people who are of school age. So I think they're really struggling financially, and they have to get students from overseas who are just looking for a private English school that they can send their kids to, because private education in England is kind of known internationally as a kind of well-respected educational, institution. So you get lots of kids from China and, Eastern Europe and all of this who just want the prestige and reputation of an English private school. And they don't know that it has anything to do with Scientology. They do clearly state on the website that they use study technology, which is, created by L. Ron Hubbard. But for people who aren't educated in Scientology, they won't know who L. Ron Hubbard is or whether that's anything to do with Scientology, because it's not very clear. And my understanding is, I don't know if they did this when you were at Greenfields, but they no longer, or they don't do meter checks and auditing sessions on the kids at Greenfields, but they do apply ethics conditions. And that's one of the most, I think, harmful, hurtful things you can do to a child, is enforce lower conditions on a kid, and that's one of the most draconian parts of Scientology policy that they apply at the school. And
Yep.
I just won't stand for it.
Yeah, no, 100%. And sure, they say study technology. Do they say, oh, and we also use Scientology ethics technology, and your children will be made to write up confessions and do lower conditions, like you say, and will be treated as adults in small bodies,
Yeah.
which is what Scientology believes, and is 100% how they treat children.
Yeah. And I had someone reach out to me who went to Greenfields who doesn't want to be named, does not really speak out publicly, but they said they were at Greenfields. And because their family was Scientologists, when they got in trouble, I think they got bullied or something happened to them. Completely nothing that's their fault. It's something that happened to them. And because of that, and because the family were Scientologists, it was sent in like a file over to St. Hill, and a case supervisor from St. Hill came to Greenfields to sort it out. And, you know, the child had to do lower conditions and ethics program and a sec check and all of this. And it was handled very much like a Scientology issue. And it was all commandeered and managed by St. Hill. Now, Greenfields publicly will say, we don't do that. We don't enforce Scientology. We're a separate thing. But if there's a Scientology link, or if a Scientologist is involved in anything you're doing at Greenfields, then St. Hill will take care of that. So yeah, technically on paper, Greenfields aren't practicing Scientology because St. Hill are the ones doing it, but they're doing it with their consent at their property, you know, and
Right.
it's just horrific.
Yeah, no, 100%. During the time that I was there, one of the teachers, Mark Kent, who was becoming a Scientologist, he was taking services at St. Hill, was committing crimes against young boys, and ended up going to jail for 5 years, I believe. But I think what's not known about that is that the reason he went to prison was because of the children that were involved who were not Scientologists. There were many other victims who were Scientologists, and they were all silenced by St. Hill and by the Office of Special Affairs. So it was absolutely covered up. And then, of course, Greenfields alleged, oh, he had nothing to do with Scientology, which was absolutely a lie.
Yeah, I mean, I know personally at least 3 people who were Scientologists at Greenfields that were victims of Mark Kent, who didn't say anything and didn't report when the police came and spoke to all the children to see the extent and breadth to which his crimes had been committed. All of the Scientology kids said, no, nothing to do with me. You know, it was absolutely fine. He was a wonderful teacher. Because it's against policy to report things to law enforcement, especially against another Scientologist. So I know at least 3 people who now have kind of started coming out of Scientology and are, you know, going through that healing journey, who are coming to terms with the fact that, hey, I didn't report this and I should have. And that's one of the things that I think people need to realize when it comes to stories of abuse or mistreatment of people and all of these things that we hear about going on in Scientology, it is always worse than you think it is, because there are always going to be people who are too scared to report it because it's against Scientology policy, and they will get in trouble for doing so.
Completely. And not only will they get in trouble, their entire families will suffer consequences. Their friends, they face completely being ostracized from the only life that they've ever known. In the case that they were born into Scientology, it's extreme. And when you take specific examples of these abuses, it really, to me, sheds a different light and puts it in the correct context that of really why we talk out about this.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know if you've seen the Greenfields website recently, but on their About Us page, if you go in, there's like a page about the history of Greenfields, and there's this huge picture that spans the whole width of the screen, which is like an old picture of all these teachers, and something looks a little off about it. And when I first saw it, I was like, what's going on there? And then I realized someone, Mark Kent, has been photoshopped out of this picture. It's like a lineup with all the
Yes.
teachers and the kids, and it's just such a badly done job. It's so obvious. It's like they're not even good at trying to hide it. You know, it's
No.
very clearly
No.
someone's been photoshopped out of this picture.
Yeah, no, I've seen that. I know it's absolutely very obvious. And in fact, I have one of those pictures from when I was attending the school that he is in. That's
Wow.
obviously not on their website. But I think the other piece, talking about the international students, is that many of those international students ended up becoming Scientologists. And because they were, at boarding school, not with their families and isolated in that Scientology environment, many of those that I knew that were there was a number from Germany during the time that I was there. Those children ended up joining the Sea organization themselves because they were in this isolated environment, which is another piece that I don't think anyone looking at the website from another country, even considering it at the moment, factors in.
Yeah. If you look at, I think it was 2016 or thereabouts, one of the reports into the school that the ISI did made the conclusion that there isn't that, it said something along the lines of the career advice and preparation for living in the real world isn't that great at Greenfields. However, it's noted that the majority of students go on to work in senior positions at the Church of Scientology, and so they don't need this career advice that most students would get. And I think that was very telling to me, because the majority of Greenfield students are international non-Scientologists.
Right.
And so the fact that they're not educating kids on how to write resumes and, how to apply for jobs and do taxes and all these really important things that you need to know how to do as an adult, they're just not doing it. And their excuse is, well, they'll work for the church. And it's absolutely true. I mean, the majority of staff that I was on staff with at London Org are all second, third generation Scientologists. A couple of them weren't, but they pretty much all went to Greenfields, because if your family can afford to send your kid to the Scientology school, you're expected to.
Right. Completely. And that's from the child perspective, that's the in group, is the kids that go to Greenfields. I mean, I can remember considering them like, you know, that they had some special prestige and status because
They were
they're
cool. It was
right.
like, oh, you went to Greenfields. That's so cool. I just went to like a normal, boring school. We didn't have study tech. You're so cool. Like, that was my view as a teenager. It's like, oh,
Yeah.
I'm missing out. I'm not part of the group,
Yeah. Though
which is
I will say that the teens in East Grinstead who were not Scientologists and went to the public school, they didn't share that perspective one bit. There was many a time that uh, we'd be walking home because we would get dropped, the bus would drop us off in East Grinstead. And then, at least for me, I had a 30-minute walk home. And sometimes I would just walk up and down the main street hanging out with my friends for a little bit before walking home. And we would see, other peers, other kids our age, so 12, 13. And we would very often get called names, Sino, 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 and like, we'd take our Greenfield sweatshirt off and try and hide it.
And that's still the term they use in East Grinstead. I always get messages from people going, "Oh, do you know when the Sinos are doing this event?" Or, I saw some Sinos in the high street the other day. And I'm like, yeah, it's just a term that I've never heard anywhere else. But
Oh my
it,
gosh.
yeah,
I've been called that since the moment I started primary school at West Hoathley, and I absolutely hated it. Because of course it's not my choice. Why are you bullying me for something that I didn't choose to do this? It's not like, you know,
yeah,
please, somebody, fairy godmother, come rescue me,
yeah.
That was my perspective as a child.
Absolutely. I think in Scientology as well, the W word is a word that Scientologists would use to describe non-Scientologists. And that kind of derogatory categorization of people does occur in Scientology. But I don't know from your experience, but we would never stand there on the street and call someone the W word, or like out loud kind of criticize them in that way. But there is still that kind of criticism. People in Scientology look at others as, we've got the special tech. Oh, they're just, they're non-Scientologists. They don't know what they're talking about. And try and brush it off as, yeah, they're saying mean things, but that's because they don't realize the truth about Scientology or whatever.
Right. Totally. And as a child growing up in with that type of derogatory language, it's very isolating
Mm,
and creates complete distrust of the outside world and forces you into that circle tighter and closer, like
yeah.
the amount of times that I would make a friend at school and my mom would be ask, oh, is she a Scientologist? Oh no, she's the W. And it's awful. And of course, again, it's just a word I grew up with. I had no idea of the real world derogatory connotation that it actually comes from. But yeah, it's again, that's to me where even the language isolates you and keeps you in that world.
Yeah, and it just goes to show the importance of, I keep harping on about this, and I'm sorry if I sound like a broken record, but kindness and compassion. Because, if you're a Scientologist that's been raised in that environment and the outside world has, since being a kid, been critical of you and judgmental and calling you names, that doesn't leave you in a situation where 20 years later you decide you want to leave, where you feel like the outside world is going to support you and offer you help, right? And I think
Right.
that's why it's really important that we don't judge Scientologists and criticize them and shout at them on the street. I mean, I know kids are always going to be different to adults, but in any regard, criticizing, shouting, harassing Scientologists is not going to create a world in which that Scientologist feels welcome and helped, And so it's really important to approach them with kindness and compassion and say, hey, you can believe in Scientology if you want to, but when you choose to leave, we're here for you, rather
Right.
than, oh, you're a Scientologist, blah, 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 which is what we see a lot of today.
Right. No, absolutely. And equally important to that, and in my mind,
Mm.
the flip side of that same coin is what are they losing by leaving? Like nobody should have to decide, oh, it's okay, I'm never going to speak to my mother ever again, or my father, or my sister, or my brother, or my cousin, or my aunt, or my uncle. That's like, what? And again, that's the destructive, abusive practice of disconnection that equally makes it very hard to walk away from, because Scientology destroys those family bonds and that family foundation. Nonetheless, it's still hard. If your entire life has been a struggle to try desperately to maintain some form of relationship with your mother, for example, in my case, then, well, of course, it's something I've been fighting for my entire life. So yes, I have to escape, but it's not without great cost.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And this is why I don't know. I know you mentioned that you were in the cadet org before going to Greenfields, but I can only imagine it must have been really hard for those people, because in a way you're connected to your parents who are in the SEAL. I mean, it's different now. I mean, I don't know about internationally, but in the UK, you're certainly not allowed to have children if you're a member of the SEAL organization. There are definitely children on staff, and there are definitely children doing services, and there are definitely people who have grown up that were raised in the cadet org and in the SEAL. But as of, I think it was around 2000-ish or so, they stopped allowing SEAL members to have children. If you got pregnant, you either had to have an abortion or you would leave the SEAL organization, because that was them trying to disband the cadet org. In 2016, they closed down the schooling element of Walsh Manor. I don't know if Walsh Manor was after your time.
It was after.
Was it? Yeah.
Yeah.
So Walsh Manor is this big building in Crowborough, which is the birthing where all the staff members at St Hill live. And they'd converted a small part of it into technically a private school. And that's where the cadet org was located. And so these kids who were born into the SEAL organization with SEAL parents were raised in this part of this building where they would see their parents for an hour or two at nighttime when they come home from post, and that's it. And they would have this shoddily made curriculum that's taught by one teacher. And from the year 2000 to 2016, they were just waiting for the kids to grow up and reach school leaving age. And the moment 2016 hit and all of the children therefore were school leaving age of 16, they closed it down, and now it's just the birthing. But I can only imagine how hard that would have been, because you are isolated, in terms of location physically, and
Right.
your contact with your parents is even more limited. And then you get shipped off to Greenfields where you're being full on indoctrinated. It must have been horrible.
Yep. No, absolutely. I've reflected on this a number of times, but in going through, I'm obviously working on my book finally, but the cadet organization, I think, in effect, serves to freeze your fight or flight mode. If you fight, you're going to get in ethics conditions, and much worse consequences. So, for example, at least while I was there, the Cadet organization didn't have a rehabilitation project force, which is the most extreme reprogramming approach that Scientology does on its members. But they did have Dex Project Force, which I was assigned to for the most ridiculous thing you've ever heard of. And it was so humiliating and just like it. So, in other words, the point being that if you fight, there's going to be severe consequences. And particularly in my case, as a child of a single mother, I stood to lose my only parent. Like, if I'm in trouble, she's not going to speak to me. I'm just going to be sequestered, sent off. And then flight, what I'm going to run away from, that then the consequences are going to be even worse. So it literally has the effect of freezing your capacity to do anything about the situation you're faced with.
Yeah, I can only imagine. I think we were speaking the other day about names and different people that you recognize, and I asked you if you knew the Kunze family, which were this German family that were over at St. Hill. And the reason I bring them up is Laura Loz, who was on staff with me at London Org, she was on the reception desk, and we used to talk all the time. We got on quite well. And I remember asking her, did you go to Greenfields? And she said, yeah, but I was in the Cadet Org before then. And I was like, oh, right. And me, as an outsider, having not been raised in Scientology, I thought, wow, that must have been so cool. Like, being completely committed to, like, basically being in the Sea Org since the moment you were born. Like, you must be so special and have all these amazing abilities. And, like, you've been changing lives since the moment you were, like, born. That's incredible. I thought it was cool. And that was my response. And she kind of said, no, it kind of wasn't really like that. Obviously, she's not going to be able to say I was abused, because that's against policy and she'd get in trouble for that. But she
Right.
made it clear that the upbringing in the Cadet Org wasn't what you would expect it to be,
Mhm.
as a Scientologist coming from outside that environment. And I always I got the impression I shouldn't ask too many questions about it, but it wasn't a nice upbringing. And that was the consensus widely known among my fellow staff members at London Org. They all knew the Cadet Org was a horrible experience, and we just don't talk about it. And now hearing you telling your story of what it was like for you, it's just disgusting, that I was working with these people that have all had this terrible experience and no one's even talking about it.
Right. No, I know. I mean, just honestly and frankly, there are there's stuff that happened in the Cadet Org that I've only even just within the last year been able to bring myself to even talk about in therapy because especially when you factor in the element of Scientology, like you were talking about earlier, where if something happens to you, it's your fault. A victim in Scientology is a bad word, and it's 100% anything that happens to you is your fault. And so therefore I just shut it all away, because I knew that if the things that happened to me were going to be blamed on me as a child, it would have completely destroyed me.
And it just makes you question, why did law enforcement not get involved? Like, how did they get away with, for so long, having this thing, the Cadet Org, at multiple locations? Because was it Bullards or Bulrushes that you were at?
No, I was at Stonelands,
Oh, Stonelands, right.
for the
So,
most part. I was also at Bullards for a later period, and then at the stables for a bit on the St. Hill property. But for the most of my time in the Cadet Org was Stonelands. Oh, and then also St. Mary's. They had a property at St. Mary's in
Rottingdean.
yes, exactly.
Ah,
Yeah, I
that's where
was
the
there
old
for a
Folo
while.
used to be, I think.
Yes, exactly. Yep.
Hmm.
So I was there for about a year, I think. In fact, that's where I first started primary school. So what age do children in UK start primary school? 5
Three
or
or four.
6? 3 or
3 or 4.
4?
Yeah.
Wow. Oh my gosh. Okay, so yeah. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Yeah. So my first school experience was when I was at St. Mary's in the cadet org there, which was about 30, 40 kids. And then my mom ended up moving back to St. Hill. And so the rest of the years was at Stonelands. Oh my gosh, just crazy, crazy, crazy.
And do you ever remember inspectors coming from, the government or any school inspections at all to check on your welfare and the quality of the education at all? Did that ever happen?
No, I have no memories of that.
Mm.
The one memory I do have is at Stonelands, of course, there was a girls' dorm and a boys' dorm, and we were not allowed to sleep, I for the most part, in our parents' rooms. We had to sleep in the dorms, so there was a night that and so again, so it's like 30 girls in the dorm, all in bunk beds, and we couldn't have play dates or sleepovers or anything like that. So instead of that, if you had a friend, you'd be like, "Oh, sleep in my bunk bed." And that would be the cadet org equivalent of spending the night with a friend. So my mother had constantly told me not to do that because there was a huge problem with lice in the cadet org, because the kids were not, they had no parents. So there was no, routine, and there was no like, oh, brush your teeth, take a shower. We were known as a very scruffy lot at the local public school, and often caught a lot of heat for that. Anyhow, I had it a little better than some of the other kids, like who, they were a family of 3 kids, for example. I had a single parent. Anyhow, so I slept in this bunk bed with my friend. I rolled over in the middle of the night, fell down, landed on some planks of wood that had been left on the floor, broke my collarbone, cut open my head. Um, and the next morning, because I loved school so much, I considered it the only normal part of my life. And I absolutely like was all in. I was completely enjoyed it. But because of that, I refused to, well, I didn't refuse. Nobody noticed that I had a broken collarbone and I had my head cut open. So I just toddled off to school anyway. And of course, when you have your collarbone broken, like any little motion is excruciatingly painful. So the teacher very quickly noticed that I was in severe pain. And then she noticed I had my blood on my head. So at lunchtime, the headmistress, Miss Mays, pulled me into the cloakroom, and she was like, "What happened?" And it didn't occur to me until many years later that she clearly saw signs of abuse, at best case neglect, and I just said, "Oh, I fell out of bed." And of course, again, self-reflection, looking back on this, I go, "Yeah, I didn't tell her that, oh, well, I sleep in a dormitory with 30 other girls, and I didn't tell her any details. I just, was so used to already. I think I was 6 or 7 at this time. I was so used to, you don't say anything to anyone in the outside world. Your voice is silenced, and you cannot say anything bad. You can't cause any bad PR, public relations for Scientology. So I just didn't tell her any details, and nor did she really probe for any details. And she just told me, "Oh, well, your mother is on her way here to take you to the hospital." And I was like, "What?" And she's like, "Well, you have blood on your head." And I was like, "What?" Anyway, but again, it's like, it was so much of a routine. Don't dramatize, don't be banky, don't complain, just do what you're supposed to be doing, or there'll be consequences. That it just was completely normal to me to do that.
And it's just a catastrophic failure of the child support and safeguarding system. And fortunately, a lot has changed in the years since then. And there's a lot more training now for teachers and people in those sorts of positions to look out for the signs of, modern slavery and child trafficking and all this stuff. But that doesn't mean people always get it right. And I don't see a world in which, even back then, a teacher could see a kid with literal blood coming out of their head and not report that to law enforcement. And if she did, why didn't it get followed up? And or if it did get followed up, did no action happen because Scientology came in and just knew what to say and the right PR line to shut down the investigation? And
Right.
this is something that's still going on today. I've seen countless pictures of kids doing the Purif over the summer period just gone at St. Hill. They've gone on this massive marketing campaign because during the summer holidays, they wanted to try and get as many kids as they could on and up the bridge. So they're posting pictures of, children as young as 12, 13 years old, with their kit bags and their like t-shirts and stuff outside the purification center at St. Hill going, I'm doing the Purif and this is amazing and you should come do it too. And, I reported this to the local government. They have a safeguarding unit. And I said, hey, these children are being abused. It's not safe to force a child to sit in a sauna for 5 hours a day and take thousands of milligrams of, niacin and other vitamins and supplements. It's simply not safe, especially not under medical supervision. And the council
Totally.
said, well, unless you're a relative or you can give us a name of a specific person doing the course right now, we can't do anything. And it has to be the police. So I then made a new report to Sussex Police altogether and said, hey, and I included all the screenshots, and they obviously won't tell me what they did because, it's not my right to know about the children doing the course. But I can only hope they went and did some sort of inspection. I told them where to go on the property. I said, hey, when you show up, they're going to try and take you on a tour of the castle. Meanwhile, they're going to vacate all the kids from the purification center. So this is on the map where you need to go, and you need to go straight there, and you will see children doing this course. And they're going to tell you that it's a religious procedure and, it gets doctors sign off and therefore it's not abusive. But please look at what the actual course entails and you will see it's harmful. And obviously I'm not related to the kids doing the course, so they won't give me any information, understandably. But only yesterday, I saw another post of another completion of a child of the purification rundown at St. Hill. And for me, it's just disgusting. It's like, this is a catastrophic failure of the safeguarding of children situation in the UK. And I don't
Completely.
really know what more to do, because this has been going on for decades, whether it's
Right.
in the Cadet org or at Greenfields or at St. Hill. How are they getting away with it?
Right. Exactly. And the purification is 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 not, there's nothing to do with religion. You're taking, like you said, vitamins, sweating, all these other things. And not to mention the fact, obviously, I'm not a medical doctor, but I've seen studies that talk about such high dosages of niacin being carcinogenic.
Yeah, and causing long-term liver damage.
Right.
It's outrageous,
It totally is.
It
Yeah.
really grinds my gears.
Yeah, no doubt. Oh, and so I also wanted to mention too, as a sad and specific example of Cadet org. Well, first of all, backing up. So again, on reflecting on my experiences in the Cadet org, I've come to view it as a combination. It's kind of like orphanage meets Nazi youth meets Lord of the Flies. That's what that experience was really like. And so in my case, my uncle Frank O'Sullivan has been in the SEER organization at St. Hill for, gosh, since the 70s. And he had two children. He has two children who were both born into the SEER organization. My cousin Amber O'Sullivan was born into the Cadet org, and at the age of 12, I think she was moved to the Free Winds. She was in the Commodore's Messenger organization there. And then eventually she ended up at the base working directly for David Miscavige. Her title was COB's runner. Um, and now she runs the film division at SMP in Los Angeles. And she, you know, I mean, at this point, she's lived her entire life in Scientology. All of her immediate family are in Scientology. But now she's perpetrating abuse on Valerie Haney as one of the people who is her, whatever it's called, the arbitrator in Valerie's lawsuit. And what's so evil about that is that Valerie and Amber both worked together and were friends. So it's very specific and calculated from Scientology's perspective to use people who have influence on Valerie and who she was friends with.
Yeah. And it's disgusting. I mean, if you look at all the kids that were at Greenfield, I know one or two people who went to Greenfields that have now quietly left Scientology, or who aren't speaking out but are kind of on the periphery, that they're not doing Scientology, but their parents or whatever are still in, so they're just kind of agreeing not to talk about it. There's a few people like that, but most of them went on to be staff at London Org or join the Sea Org at St. Hill. And it's just really sad to see how from a very early age they're indoctrinated to not just become Scientologists, but to work for the church. The Wackley family are a prime example. Natalie, it used to be a teacher at Greenfields. Even she is now on staff at London Org. She left her job at Greenfields as a teacher so that she could volunteer with me and my friends, her son Charlie and Matt and Jason, so that she could sell books and help the cause, as it were. Jason is now in the Sea Org over in California. Matt is still on staff. He was a core soup last time I knew at London Org, and Charlie is now the deputy executive director of London Day. And this whole family are not just Scientology staff members, but they're also the whale families here in the UK. Like the Wackley family, I think Charlie has donated himself $1 million to the IAS, the International Association of Scientologists. And so not only are they working for the church, but they're financially propping it up. And that puts them in this really weird situation where I can imagine they have to apply ethics tech very hard, when things don't go right in the org. But there's also an element of not wanting to upset them too much, because they are a huge part of how Scientology stays afloat in the UK. And there are multiple families like this, and it's
Right.
just, it's impossible for any of them to leave.
Yeah, totally. And you bring up a really good point, because there are also some of those families whose kids were my age and who were at the base in the Sea organization at the headquarters in Gilman Hot Springs, California, and who have since left and who firsthand witnessed abuses and yet who are not speaking out. So, for example, Astra Croft, who's now Astra Fear, the Croft family were considered whales, at least when I was growing up in East Grinstead.
Yeah.
Astra has firsthand perpetrated abuse, witnessed abuse, and so forth. Not a peep. Same for Galley Fear, Galley Baram. That's another family that had donated millions of dollars to Scientology in East Grinstead. Who else? Abigail Whitaker, Abigail Miller. She is another person who worked at Gilman Hot Springs headquarters and who is now out and has children and hasn't said a word, hasn't reported the abuses she personally witnessed. Anyway, I could go on and on, but, sure, it's your choice to speak out. But if you witnessed abuses, at least the bare minimum you could do is report it to law enforcement.
Yeah, I think my mind goes to the place of, it takes a lot. If you leave Scientology, it takes a lot mentally to get to the position where you decide, I want to speak out and share my story publicly. And it's totally, my opinion is, it's totally okay to not do that. If you don't want to become an outspoken critic, that's fine. You can go about your business and have your life and not think about Scientology ever again. However, I personally believe that if you were witness to things like abuse or a part of it or whatever, the least you could do is privately report it to law enforcement anonymously if you're that worried about it. But at least you've then done the right thing and said, hey, this happened. I'm aware of it. Here's my testimony. I don't want to talk about it publicly. I've been working with law enforcement in the UK on a number of things at the moment, for the last couple of years or last year or so. And a lot of people have contacted me and said, hey, I don't want to speak out publicly. I don't want my name attached to anything because my family is still in. And as much as I'm completely out, I don't want to risk fair game. I don't want to risk disconnection. And that's absolutely fine. And the police and whoever else is involved in these investigations have made it very clear that they are happy to put precautions in place to ensure the anonymity of people giving testimony and, you know, who are victims or who are, you know, witnesses to abuse and are willing to put their story forward. I think that for me is where I draw the line. If
Yep.
you were involved, or even if you weren't involved, you just saw it, report it to law enforcement, make it clear you don't want your name attached to it. But without you doing that, it's going to continue happening, and it
Right.
has been going on for decades, and it's not going to stop unless people like you report it because
Yep.
law enforcement can
Completely.
only go on their reports.
That's right. Exactly. So, yeah, and I completely agree. If you don't want to speak out publicly, that's okay, but definitely report the crimes
Mm,
that you witnessed personally or that you knew about or anything else to prevent future victims of Scientology.
yeah, 100%. And
Yeah.
it's just, you know, I was just thinking about other family names that you were mentioning there. You know, did you know the Miltons, the Milton family?
Miltons, I don't think so.
They were Scottish. They had a really big involvement with Happy, the Edinburgh org, and they came down. And now Craig and Scott and Glenn, they're all working at London org, and one of them's the executive director. I'm just trying to think. The Lycett family. Did you know Alistair and Trish Lycett? They're one of the biggest donors in the UK at the moment, and they sent their kids Hannah and Steph to Greenfields, and they then joined staff at London org. They then went on the TTC, and Hannah became an auditor over at Flag. She trained on the golden age of Tech 2 when I
Hmm.
was on staff, and she came back, and I think they've now both left staff. I think Hannah might have joined the Sea Org, but Steph has left staff. But it's just interesting to see those people, second generation Scientologists, who are now having children. I don't believe Steph sent her kids to Greenfields. And I think that says a lot. If you are
Yes.
a committed Scientologist that went to Greenfields that have now had kids, you
Yes.
know.
Another big family that I remember was the Banks family.
Thanks,
and
that doesn't
and the
ring
Browns. The Browns,
bells.
I think it was. Judy.
Adelina Louisa Brown. That's the name that comes up a lot on corporate documents here. Mm.
Yeah.
There's a lot of them.
Yeah, there is. But it is a small, shrinking world, as you say. And so the important thing is to keep shining a bright light and make it harder and harder for them to keep getting away with abuses.
Mhm. And just realizing the cognitive dissonance and the whole, like, there is such a big discrepancy between what Scientology preach and what is actually going on. You know, like there are some families, the Cronins, for example, right? There
Yes,
are some
I knew them.
Cronins, yeah, the Cronins who are fully committed, dedicated Scientology. I think Alex and Tash were in a recent publication having donated some large amount of money to the Ideal Org program, completely disconnected from the other half of their family. And I think this is the thing, is they're going to be thinking Scientology is making everyone happy, and you know it's the best thing ever, and we're all living a greater existence. We're donating all of this money. Alex and like the Cronin family didn't come from money. They're not known as wealthy Scientologists.
No, in fact, Paula Cronin ran the Cadet org as the only adult running 30, 40 children
Mm.
during the years that I was in the Cadet org.
So she's not going to be earning thousands and thousands of pounds to do that. And
No.
it's really upsetting to see someone like Alex Cronin, who didn't come from money, who managed to make a living, you know, make a bit of a life for himself, and bought a house, right? He was up until that point renting and shared accommodation. And now he's sold his house to donate the money to the IAS or to the Ideal Org program, and is
Oh,
now at the age of, I think he's in his 40s now or late 30s, now living in shared accommodation with 3 other adults and struggling to pay his bills because he's
wow.
donated all his money away. And it's really upsetting to see someone come from nothing, make something of themselves, and then Scientology just take it all away.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, he doesn't speak to half his family. and thinks they're all suppressive people, but will tell the world he's the best, most happiest person on the planet and is making the world a better place. Like,
Yeah.
for me, it's
Well,
bonkers.
you're right. Walking example of cognitive dissonance. Like,
Yeah.
do you not see yourself in the mirror? Does the reflection not come back in the morning?
No, and that's the thing, it doesn't. When you're in that little
Yeah.
mindset, when you're in that group, you don't realize, and it's really hard to kind of show people the reality of it, because they won't listen to anybody that's not a Scientologist, because they'll just say, oh, you're an SP, you're just trying to change my mind, you're trying to manipulate me. It's like, no, just trying to show you a mirror, look at your own life and
Right.
realize, you know.
Yeah, or even just ask yourself some
Mm.
simple questions and be honest about the answers. That would be a step forward in the right direction.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
I think the Greenfields question is one of them. You know, if you know a Scientologist who went to Greenfields that's now had kids, why didn't you send your kids to Greenfields? Oh,
Yeah.
you know, whatever reason they give, it's like, okay, well, you know, you wouldn't want them to have the experience you had in the Cadet org or at Greenfields,
You
you
don't
know?
want them to have the gains to achieve
Yeah,
the gains and achieve
gains
the
and wins.
knowledge have. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Oh my gosh, crazy,
But that's what I mean,
crazy.
almost using the tech or using Scientology terms, but in a question format to get them thinking. That's the sort of thing that I think will plant the seeds of doubt.
Yep.
I hope, you know.
I hope so too. You and me both. Awesome. Well, thank you as always for a great conversation. We will do more down the road, I'm sure, but thanks for your time today and keep on keeping on. And again, thank you for your amazing work and persistence and the progress that you're making in the UK.
Thank you. I couldn't do it without your support and the help of everyone else. So thank you as well, Claire.
Yes, absolutely. Awesome. Until next time.
Thanks for watching. If you'd like to help support the channel, feel free to check out the merch store link in the description. We have Hail Xenu, Xenu is my homeboy, and BFG branded mouse pads, shirts, mugs, all sorts of other stuff in there that helps us to bring you new content on a regular basis. You can also pick up a copy of my book, Blown for Good, Behind the Iron Curtain of Scientology, in hardback, Kindle, and Audible versions as well. There's also a link to our podcast, and you can get that on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you'd like to watch another video, you can click on this link right here, or you can click on this one here, or you can click on the subscribe button right here. Thanks a lot. Until next time.